Talk about how to experiment well. So we're going to apply a lot of things that we've already been talking about to designing an experiment, right? So before we were looking at how to perform an observational study well and doing random assignment and things like that. We're going to do kind of the same thing, but now we're going to apply those concepts to experiment. So we'll talk about how to randomly assign treatments. Pretty much the same thing. The only difference is that we'll be assigning subjects to a control group and some subjects to an experiment group. When we were looking at an observational study, when we were just going to give a survey, right? We just selected a number of people from a population and gave them the survey, right? So just a really slight change with this, and that we'll be assigning people to an experiment and a control group when we do this. Also talk about why we need to randomly assign our subjects to a control or an experiment group. And talk about confounding variables, how to avoid them, and things like that. All right. So we need to always do some sort of random assignment of our experimental unit. This is because people tend to have a bias. They've done studies on this. People have said, hey, select a group of things or people, and don't be biased, right? Try to be as unbiased as possible. And it turns out that people have a tendency to systematically choose things that they like or that appeal to them, even when they're trying not to. So if we randomly assign our subjects to control or experiment groups, we're going to avoid introducing that bias. It would be completely random. There would be no way for me to, choose people with brown eyes just because that's just something I do. They found things like that, right? That if people were picking people had a tendency to pick people, and they found that they had like one trait in common, and people weren't even trying to do that. They were trying actually not to do that, and they would still enter some bias in. We're just like that, right? We kind of choose the things that we like. I think it's probably a natural survival mechanism. Anyhow, also when you're randomly assigning, you've gotta select by random selection enough people. So it turns out that people have all these differences and things like that. If I select enough people, right, then the chances of me selecting people with the same difference for my experiment group or in the same trait or in a different trait to my control group is lessened. For instance, right, say I am doing an experiment where the difference between gender would make kind of a difference in the way the experiment would turn out. If I select a small group, there's a chance that even though I'm using a random assignment and I'm randomly selecting them, there's a chance that I get more females in my control group, right? And very few females in my experiment group. This would be bad, right? Because then I would be looking at the differences between gender and not the difference that I was imposing with my treatment. If we take a very large sample, the chances of there being a really disproportionate amount of males or females in my control or experiment group gets much, much smaller. And this is called replication, right? Just the idea that if I get a large enough sample, I should be able to eliminate some of those confounding factors. All right. So we're going to need to, so essentially what we need to do is keep our subjects as similar as possible. We don't want to be measuring the differences in our subjects, right? We'd like to be measuring the difference between the experiment and the control group. And that prevents us from introducing some sort of confounding variable. Also, we'll want to keep variables in the experiment the same, right? If we're going to say be testing some people with or without maybe some aid, right? We would want everyone, both our experiment and our control group, we would want them to be in the exact same environment, taking the exact same test. We want to ensure that there aren't any other variables being entered into the experiment, except for the actual treatments that we're going to be putting in the experiment. And down here below, you're going to see that we have two different graphs. This one is showing a high amount of variation, and this one is showing a low amount of variation. And I think that in graph A, we have eliminated some of those variables. They're called lurking variables as well, although your book doesn't get into that. So, all right, let's get to it. Let's actually do a problem. This one is very similar to what you're going to be doing in your assignment after this, assignment 3.7. So follow along. You'll be answering really similar questions. So, researchers in Canada, they want to know if they say multitasking, but really people are distracted. Right back in the day when Coach and I went to school, we really had very little to distract us in class. We just had each other. I didn't have a device that connected to the internet where I could search for anything that I wanted. I could entertain myself endlessly. No, we just had each other to distract each other. So now, right? That's all we did, right? If
I paper rods or yeah.
Exactly. Or try to crack jokes, whatever. I couldn't be distracted in other ways. So now with these distractions, it looks like these researchers wanted to find out how that is affecting people's learning, right? And now you'll see in college, most everybody's got a laptop sitting in front of them. And I mean, maybe they're actually taking notes. Maybe they're just surfing the internet. Let's get into it. Let's answer some questions about this. So let's describe how the researchers could have carried out a random assignment. And gosh, I don't think I saved. I had added a page onto this so that I could not cram writing into this little space here. Oh, hey, look, I've already got it. Hey, cool. All right. Yeah, the first time I did this lesson, I was just really trying to cram a lot of words in a little spot, and this is going to work much better. Here we go. So, really, all that this question is asking is for me to be really, really specific in talking about how I randomly select. Here we go. Okay. Man, I had a headache this morning and I just ate, and man, that's all I needed to do was eat. It's crazy. I feel so much better all of a sudden. All right. So, same deal as we did with an observational study. You're giving out a survey, right? We've got to give each participant a number. From 1 1 to 40. And then we are going to use the randint function. And what we'll do, we'll hit 1 comma 40, right? We want numbers, randomly select numbers from 1 to 40. We're going to do 20 of them. And the calculator. To randomly generate, we want to use that word random. It's really important. If the word random is not there, it's not right. Randomly generate 20 numbers. Without repeats, right? We got to make sure that we don't repeat any numbers, because we can't select a person twice. The participants whose I don't know how to say that. I think that's how you. I don't know how to spell whose. That's intense. Okay. We're going to place those ones in the experiment group. Will be placed. And the remaining participants, you see that it's a lot of writing. Essentially, when you're doing this, you're kind of like giving instructions to someone, right? If they've never done this before, hopefully they would be able to follow your instructions and do this random selection. That's kind of the way that I look at answering these questions. Will be placed in the control group. Yeah, that's right. I think we did it. Fantastic. And that is how we would use a process of random selection to assign subjects into a control and an experiment group. All right. So why was it important that the researchers randomly assigned treatments to the students? And that was what I was talking about earlier, because it eliminates bias. That's the easiest way to say it. Yeah, I think I had more to say about that last time, but I don't know how to say. I don't know how I said more. That's it right there in a nutshell, right? That's why we're doing it. We don't want to introduce some sort of a bias in our selection. I guess I could say in the selection process or something like that, but shorten to the point. Why not? All right, number 3. Let's identify one variable that the researchers kept the same for all subjects. Provide 2 reasons why this was important. Let's go back and look at the actual scenario here. What 2 things were kept the same for everyone? Well, it looks like they all attend the same lecture, and everyone has a laptop, right? Everybody gets a laptop, and everyone is attending the same lecture. I think I'm going to stick with the lecture one. It's the easiest one to talk about. Although the laptop one wouldn't be terrible, right? If everyone has a laptop, if your control group, nobody got laptops, or sorry, yeah. But in your experiment group, there were laptops, and that would be kind of strange. Well, I really messed that ass up, didn't I? Then you might be seeing the difference between, taking notes on paper or taking notes on a laptop. We want to make sure that we keep things the same. But in this case, let's talk about all participants having the same lecture. Okay, why is it important for this variable to be the same? Well, if they got 2 different lectures, maybe one's more interesting than the other one, something like that. Where that's a T. So it's possible one lecture is more interesting than the other. And this could increase comprehension. Or, yeah. Right, and if it does, right, so if we were to give the experiment group a cooler lesson than the control group, then it might even out, right? It might be the case that the distracted people actually retained more because they were just more interested, right? And not, and the distraction really wasn't a factor there. Cool. So same kind of deal in your assignment that we'll be posting. Make sure that you guys are being very specific. It's just going to be a lot of writing. And please, do that. Be specific, be succinct. Not succinct, that's not the right word. But be detailed. That's the word I'm looking for. All right. So, hey, we did this stuff. It didn't take long. It was kind of fun. I don't know. Maybe for me.